Motion carried. Next item of business is a general public comment. This provision is made to encourage the expression of questions and concerns regarding non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to address the Planning Commission on something that is not on the agenda this evening, please approach the podium and state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, we will move on.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to excuse myself for this next case.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Case number 19-838, 1983 Brewing Company, LLC, 3393 Remembrance Road Northwest, site plan, special exception use review and public hearing. Michael Smith and Brad Lawrence of 1983 Brewing Company, LLC have applied to a site plan review on behalf of owner Bosworth Builders, LLC / Tiny Giant Leasing, LLC, to use an existing 3,000 square foot building, 720 square foot accessory building and paved surface area to operate a business which includes small batch beer brewing, commercial sales, and limited on-site consumption, and to add parking and other improvements. Dan?
Go through my slides like normal. I'm going to give a little bit of the planning and zoning context here, and I'll keep it brief. This is something that I've been looking at with the applicants for a couple of months now, so this isn't just appearing out of thin air. It's something that we've gone through a couple of iterations with to try to kind of figure out how this land use proposal fits within our zoning ordinance and how it can develop on this site. So you are the second board to be reviewing this. Our Zoning Board of Appeals reviewed this in June and early July, which I'll talk about shortly. And I'll talk about why this process involves a couple of steps. So the first bit of context I'm going to share here is that Tyler read the description of this use as being something that involves small batch beer brewing, sales of beer, limited on-site consumption, and some minor site improvements. Our zoning ordinance is set up in a manner that we list a whole bunch of land uses, and this is not uncommon for other communities, by the way. We list a lot of land uses. We kind of box them in to where they fit within our planning goals for the city. And if there's a use that doesn't show up on any of those lists, we don't technically permit it, but that leaves, kind of boxes you out of creativity of having a lot of land uses that you might, the powers that be, especially when the zoning ordinance was written, may not have known about or foreseen. So almost all of our, in fact, all of our industrial and commercial standard zoning districts have a provision in them that says something along the lines of, this zoning district allows for X, Y, and Z use or other uses that are deemed to be compatible with the intent of this zoning district and similar to the other permitted principal uses in this zoning district. That's a determination that our Zoning Board of Appeals has to go through. And in this case, our ZBA did do just that in late June and early July. So what I asked the Zoning Board of Appeals to do was to kind of take the definition of the land use from the applicant, lock that in to something that we can understand, and rule out other land uses that are really more appropriate in other zoning districts. I'll show on the next slide, this is a C3 zoned lot primarily, with a little bit of residential zoning on it. You have different components of things that get kind of close to other land uses that you want to be careful about because those are really reserved for other zoning districts, like industrial brewing, anything that's a significant volume of beer being brewed on a site really would be more of an industrial land use, or it might fit in a certain context in Standale, like the DeHops Brew Pub is a reasonably limited site for Standale, but any kind of large brewery operation like Founders would be more appropriate in an industrial zone. Things like liquor stores, where you're selling spirits and liquor, and your whole business model is based primarily on having a significant percentage of your income be from selling beer, liquor, and wine, and being set up a certain way, like the conventional liquor stores that you think of in Walker. So you got to rule that out too. You got to say this is not a brewery, this is not a liquor store, this is also not essentially a bar or nightclub. which would really be only appropriate in Standale, at least the way that our ordinance is set up right now. And even then, it would be a special use that has a certain level of review with the Planning Commission. So the ZBA went through these hoops, and the applicant went through these hoops and said, based on the floor plan that's being provided, based on limits on hours of operation for different components of this use, and based on a limited service area and a small amount of production, we're comfortable saying this is a C3 highway commercial-like use. And they made that determination with some conditions related to making sure the boxes are checked on the licenses that come in terms of beer sales on the site and beer consumption on the site, performance standards related to noise, odor, and limits on hours of operation, limits on service floor area such that only 25% of the floor can be used as what might eventually become a tasting room or a sampling space. So within those confines, the ZBA granted a conditional approval. They also asked that a site plan review move forward for this use. It is a pretty significant change in use from what was there before. Without showing you any of this stuff in the slides, you have in your packet some information about what was there before. It was Bosworth Builders, it was a building company, and then before that there was a dental laboratory. So this building has been a kind of a dynamic site, but this is certainly a significant change of use that the ZBA said should go through a site plan review with you folks as the spatial board to look at how the use lays out on the site. Quickly, I want to talk about the zoning again, this time in map view, just to show you that this is a stretch of Remembrance Road. We're by Ripens Drive there, near where Leonard meets Remembrance and near the Grand Rapids city limits, where you do have this split zoning. A lot of these older commercial, smaller lots, even though that's a pretty intensive commercial zoning category, things like 100-foot setbacks apply here. These are really meant to be auto-oriented sites based on the zoning. All of these sites, almost all of these sites in this stretch of Remembrance Road have a stretch of single-family residential zoning in the back. And that's just important to know because that kind of works as a buffer, or I think it was intended to work as a buffer where you don't have commercial activities in the rear of these lots to protect the neighboring residential properties. Behind this site is the Leonard Gardens plat that was, or Leonard Garden Homesites plat that was approved in the 1920s. So these homes have been there a long time, and there's an effort to kind of preserve the integrity of that neighborhood by the buffering. And that is all to say that when we have split zoning like this and there's a use that might encroach part of that other zoning, the Planning Commission can review that through the lens of a special use permit. So that's why part of what you're reviewing tonight is special exception use review standards to say, hey, this is a use that's going to spill out onto the single family residential zoned part of the site to some extent, but to a limited extent that's not going to impact the neighbors and has harmony with the neighboring properties. So there are some standards related to the special use criteria that are built in to this application because, and built into your motion because of that split zoning issue. From a future land use and planning standpoint, we want to try to take a look at the big picture here. This is a part of Walker that we are going to be diving into deeply in our master plan process, just like everything else. We haven't really touched this yet with this round of master planning, but back in 2011, 2012, before I was here, there was some concept of what the D&W site across the street could look like with mixed housing and kind of a different redevelopment pattern. What we see today, there's, as you might remember from a couple of years ago, there was a approval of the Everkept storage building at that D&W site. So that's going to be a pretty static use if it stays that way. But that doesn't mean we can't start to piece together the different other land uses in this area that might have some synergy with what's being proposed here. So we like to think about all these small businesses and how to improve their viability. There's the ice cream shop, the baking company, Walker Roadhouse. There's a Latin restaurant a couple doors down from this site. So I think it's just something to keep in mind as you look at the growth of this area or the potential growth of this area. How do all these uses interrelate and serve the neighborhood that surrounds them? So with that said, let's get into the site plan. For this level of review, what you see in your packet is a hand-drawn sketch site plan. We don't require a significant site plan with a lot of engineering detail necessarily for a minor set of improvements like this. I remember the ZBA was asking for a site plan review more as a function of the change of use, and there's really not much in the way of site expansion except for a few additional parking spaces, 5 additional parking spaces on the west end of the site there. And so there's a hand-drawn site plan, but we do want to have a professional designer, a professional architect or engineer seal and sign off on a plan that we can file with our records. But this image right here is just my analysis of what's on that site plan. Within the building, you have the area where they're going to be brewing beer. They say one batch is 3 barrels or less per batch, and that's fewer than 2,000 barrels per year. I'll let the applicant correct me if that's not right, but it's a small brewing operation, and I understand that the business model is to have something that there's a limited amount of product produced at any given time that's got a limited shelf life, so you're kind of constantly producing something new. But so that's where the production area is, up in that northern corner of the building. Some formalizing the existing paved surface as parking, some striped parking up front, and then of course these diagonal spaces on the west side of the site, and then having circulation kind of one way around the building because there really isn't enough room to provide adequate turning with two-way traffic around both sides of the building there. So the things I was focusing on with this site plan have been that circulation issue, the potential for future growth and expansion, and what happens with parking if there is ever a significant level of growth of this business, being sensitive to the edges and the buffering with the neighboring properties, particularly with regard to whether that use is going to generate a lot of odor, whether there's going to be significant noise or kind of industrial type concerns, and the MLCC licensing and making sure that the licenses get reviewed by our city commission and approved as necessary. So based on those broad focus areas, my recommendations are I always want to adopt the city engineer's recommendations in his report. With regard to the circulation around the site, I think we should have thermoplastic or something similar where there's actually arrows painted on the pavement showing the wayfinding there, some signage as necessary to block traffic from going the wrong way around the building. There should be no manufacturing or service in that accessory building in the rear, and that spills over into that residential portion of the site, so we want to be careful with that spot. No outdoor service, at least for the time being, of alcohol or really anything outdoors. This application has been pretty clear that they're keeping everything inside, at least in this phase, and so we want to keep that as a condition of approval. There should be a 15-foot wide green belt near the northwest edge of the site, and that's that spot up here where if you really zoom out, you can see the proximity to Ripens. I think that address is correct, where we have 3385 Ripens. That's only about 130 feet from that parking space there, and then 3365 is about 110 feet from that furthermost parking space back here. We want to make sure we maintain that 15-foot green belt somehow, so you might have to lose or move around a parking space back there and add some landscaping just to accommodate that. And I can work with the applicants on the final design there. The employee parking should be in the rear, and that's just a function of making sure there's adequate parking capacity out front so people don't get confused. Future expansions or additions should come back to you folks as a site plan review, and that includes outdoor service. And then I've added this, and it's kind of redundant, but future changes to the scope of the use that call into question or expand upon what was approved by the ZBA in July should go back to the ZBA for review. So really, if this becomes more of if there's a request that this expands the service area in the future, that they expand their classification of brewing, that should really go back to ZBA for review, and then it may prompt further planning commission review as well. And then finally, the final plans should be submitted and sealed by a design professional for record keeping. So with those recommendations, I feel comfortable recommending approval. It is a conditional approval with some significant conditions there, but I think there's enough here to keep this plan moving forward based on what's been submitted to the ZBA and the Planning Commission.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Any questions for Dan initially? Scott?
Yeah, as Dan mentioned, my report is a little bit softer than normal because this is a site that doesn't really require a full site plan review, but did put some notes together anyway. As we looked at this site plan review, basically we said, hey, the building footprint is going to stay exactly where it is, the parking is going to stay exactly where it is. But as we talked about the need for more parking on the site, we agreed to allow some pervious materials for parking in those diagonal spots there. We said we'll still consider it as a zero impact as long as the water can go through that. If it's crushed stone, if it's some pavers that have some gravel in between and some things like that, I should use the word gravel, stone in between, we would continue to look at it that way. So that gets us through that note. I think the second part of that is we still would want to get a stormwater as-built because there's 2 catch basins on the site and a maintenance agreement to make sure that they're going to take care of that, because if they buy the site, they are responsible for that. And on any kind of site like this where there's this kind of an activity, there's the chance that there could be spills of cleaning materials and the warts and all the kinds of things that are created here. We want to make sure that we know where that stuff's going in case there is a problem. So that's pretty standard. Dan also mentioned circulation. As we looked at this originally, there wasn't a circulation pattern. And when we looked at the east property line or the southeast property line, and I don't believe this picture shows it, but there's also an addition to that building, like a chimney-sized addition on the southeast side. It really infringes upon that narrow corridor, so you've only got about 15 feet. And we said that should be a circular movement, but in addition to that, it would be wise to put a cross-access easement on that 15 feet there, because as the neighboring site redevelops, and it's tried a couple of times, it used to be Bud's Hamburgs, and when Bud passed away, I think the family invested some money in there, wanted to get it going again. So money's been invested in this building, and it's waiting to come back to life. I think we're going to want to know that there's cross-access between those 2 sites at that location. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and it could be that these 2 sites come together at some point. I think that'd be awesome if that could happen. But if not, we don't want to have a feud where they put a fence down the property line or a whole bunch of concrete bollards. These things have happened, so we certainly don't want that to happen. Planning Commission should consider the outdoor use thing. This really isn't part of kind of an engineering review, but I think as we look at the site and how it's used, and we look at other proposals like this around West Michigan, there's almost always some outdoor stuff. There's pallets with grain and the waste materials and barrels and things like that. People taking breaks outside, all those things that would happen normally during the day on a site like this will now occur at night, and that, something to really take special care of, I think, as we take a look at the neighbors in that area. I think the last thing is they had given us a couple of different sites to take a look at, and I took on the very difficult job of traveling to one of these other comparable facilities out in Lowell called New Union, and it was just an awesome place. But I think one of the things we noticed quickly is even if they intended to sell mostly from a retail standpoint, there were Mug Club members on the wall. There's probably seating for 50 people inside. Got quite busy around 5 o'clock. Parking lots were pretty full. A lot of people gathering outside. Those are all things that we really need to consider here, because I think we want this to be a success if we allow it. And if that's the case, then we're going to have some parking and some friction, I think, with these land uses. So it's important to look at what to do if that happens. Are there more opportunities to shoehorn some more parking spots on the site? Is there a way to have them work with the neighbor? Those kinds of things. And I think if they go forward and expand that 25% indoor capacity, those are things that we need to look at very carefully and probably send this back to the ZBA. So that's it for me.
Any questions for Scott?
If you don't have questions for Scott, I just have 2 updates. There is a small amount of material with an orange highlight in it. That's an updated recommended motion at the end of that packet, and there's a comment from one of our commissioners, or a set of comments from one of our commissioners, just with some questions to consider for this site as kind of a public comment that we can add to the record.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Does the applicant have additions or something to present?
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Brad Lawrence, co-owner of 1983 Brewing. Thank you for being here to review our site plan. I don't have anything that additional to what Dan and Scott added. However, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. As far as some of the points that they brought up about production amounts, our system would be a 1-barrel system, which is roughly 31 gallons boiling at a time. Similar breweries have 3 to 5 barrel systems. We do not believe the odor would be an infringement on the neighbors. If you have a home brewer that you live by, that's typically 6 to 10 gallons that they're boiling at a time, so it's only roughly 3 times the size of the average home brewer at any given time. We would be brewing 4 to 6 times a week on that scale, so there would be roughly 6 hours a week where there would be, the site would be ventilated to keep that moisture out of the building. However, it would not be by any means an extreme amount of odor or fumes leaving the building, and that would only be steam. It's an all-electric system. We also provided, I don't know if they mentioned it at all, it is in your packet, our proposed hours. We would not be operating into the evening, and those are hours that we would adhere to and agree to adhere to, our hours of operation. So it would not be anything that infringes upon people's evenings, and there would be no activity at the site at night whatsoever. So I did want to add that onto what Dan and Scott said, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have regarding our site.
Okay, questions from the commission?
I know nothing about brewing beer. Do you use the city water, or where do you get the water from?
Yep, so it is city water, filtered, and then you use roughly about twice the amount because you have to mash the grains and soak them in the water. Then you drain that off and boil it, and that becomes the beer. There's also additional water uses for cleaning, but it is all taken from city water.
In a barrel of beer, that's not like a barrel of oil or a difference?
No, it's a barrel of oil, I think, is like 55 gallons. A barrel of beer is 31 to 31 and a half, roughly.
Well, I think the city here has worked hard to fit you guys in. Do you realize that? This is kind of a small space to me, and they've worked very hard to keep you happy. I feel like you're an addition to the neighborhood, and that's the general feeling with me too, but it is kind of a small site. But yes, it sounds to me like I'd be for it.
It absolutely is. I can't thank Dan and Scott enough. I'm a resident of Walker. I live Sierra and Mission, and I can't even begin to thank them enough for how hard they work. I would hope that they put this much work into every new business that comes into Walker, because it's been fantastic. And I know it's not been easy with the C3 zoning and the fears that come along with a business related to alcohol sales, but I can assure you we are not going to be a liquor store, and we're not going to be a traditional brewery. This is mostly to-go sales with production on site to give people a very fresh product that they can go enjoy at home.
What kind of signage are you looking at as far as, are you looking at just building signage? Are you looking at anything on the street? How are you going to get customers in there?
The only signage we would have is on the front of the building.
Okay. Is this going to be a non-smoking facility?
Absolutely.
Can you define a little bit more, no work at night? I mean, what do you think your hours are going to be?
Sure. So we have rough hours of operation included in the packet. When you brew, the brewing process between preparation, the actual brewing, cleaning, and finishing the day takes anywhere between 8 and 10 hours. We only plan on brewing 2 days a week. It's a 1-barrel system, and our fermenters will be 3 barrels. So we have the ability to produce 6 barrels a week. That's 2 days. The other days of operation would just be on-site sales. So there would be no brewing at night. There would be no receiving of any materials at night. There would be no sales at night. Our sales would be just during the day, during the proposed operating hours.
Monday through Wednesday production time, and it's kind of a Thursday,
Yeah, I think the hours we had proposed, and these were just additional for production as well as sales from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. And that was Tuesday through, oh yeah, there they are, sorry. So there's really production hours, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 2 of those days will be actually producing the beer. One of those days will be packaging, which would have no impact on the surrounding sites at all, no noise, vibration, or release of any odors. And then the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday would be sales hours, and none of those, again, go past 7 p.m.
How many different beers are you going to be making?
Right now, we have 7 finished recipes. They would be in rotation. We'll typically have 2 to 3 available at a time. The idea is to, by doing small batches, and as opposed to like a 10-barrel batch at a time, we can match our demand with what we're producing. So people will be receiving beer that was packaged between 2 and 10 days prior to their purchase. That way they're given the freshest product possible as opposed to going to a store or even a brewery where the average shelf life is those beers have already been there for 2 to 3 months. If you've ever had a very, very fresh beer, the product is superior. So we would like people to be able to, we would package a product on Wednesday, have people come in Thursday, Friday, Saturday, be able to buy that on a rotating basis, and demand would obviously dictate which styles we would brew the most of, but we have 6 to 7 finished recipes right now.
Cans or bottles?
90% would be cans.
Because I just know bottles will make a lot of noise as they
Absolutely.
and so on, so.
Bottles are really not much used in the industry anymore. Not only for that, but they're significantly more dangerous and less shelf stable. You can't take them camping. You can't take them on boats. When they break, they're terribly dangerous. It's just, they let in UV light, which destroys a beer in a few minutes. It's just not worth it.
Other questions or comments? Otherwise, you can have a seat, and I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Make motion to open the hearing?
Motion by Steve, is there support?
Support.
Support by Pat. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is open. If you would like to comment on this case, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Hello, gentlemen. Carol
Carol.
Glanville, 1878 Stratford Lane. I'm the commissioner who sent comments in this afternoon. So I just wanted to make sure that if you had any questions or kind of go through those a little bit, what my thinking was. I mentioned that I really appreciate the work that you all have done on this special use case. I think it does fit the neighborhood and what we're looking to do with the master plan and bringing community together a little bit more here in Walker. So the idea that this kind of butts up with that residential neighborhood, I think that it's a good fit the way that it's planned, so I'm supportive of that. One concern I had, though, was just in the initial drawings, and I know these are just initial, it shows just a fence, and I'm wondering if there would be consideration for some plants, trees, bushes, whatever, to go in there that might be a little bit more of a visual break for the neighbors, and then also help with some of that noise. Particularly if there were to be in the future any outside activities, which brings me to one of my next points, which, again, going on the idea that this could be a community place, I would hope that there might be room to have something like a bocce ball court and cornhole and things like that, where people could commune outside and really make it a place like a pub, you know, and have that kind of friendly atmosphere for people to gather. I don't know what that means for service outside. Maybe there is no service outside and it's just, that's an extra feature. You know, similar to Double Dip Depot across the street with a little different flavor. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about and that I hope you'll take into consideration as you're making your decision and alongside some of the notes that Dan and Scott had shared with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, you said you'd be working with the applicant on screening, or?
This is a bit of a punt because I didn't specifically work with them before the meeting, but I guess I will want to work with them, particularly concerns the scale of that plan. The northernmost parking space, we probably want to put that somewhere else or maybe remove it. There might be room for another diagonal space in its place. And then like Commissioner Glanville said, I think we can be deliberate about a little bit of landscaping there, probably in a proportional way where you're adding parking or pushing parking up against the edges, you want to provide some extra screening there, understanding there is some existing landscaping. So if the applicant is willing to work through that with me, I'd like to maybe throw some plants on that plan and move that northernmost parking space.
Under the ZBA grant, they specifically said no outdoor activity in the ZBA grant, didn't they?
The language, I believe, is no outdoor service, and so that also ties to liquor licensing and where you have consumption of alcohol outside. It kind of changes the nature of the use. But we sort of left open-ended outdoor activities like games and things like that. And we could probably look at that, if it comes to that, we can probably look at some of that administratively, but I would want to bring any building expansion back to you folks to look at that as a site plan review.
Okay.
Yeah, on that part, and I don't mind the concept, but I just think with the site circulation, it makes it really tough to have a good outdoor space for things like that, just because it is so tight. If they can make it work and have it be safe for the folks who are there, then I don't have a problem with it. And I think administratively, you guys can handle outdoor activity. But that's just something I think we need to think about when we're kind of considering that. Oh, I did have another thing too.
Go ahead.
How are you guys going to be receiving that delivery, whatever frequency it is? Just with the circulation on the site being so tight, I don't know if, are you just going to have a box truck parked out front or?
Yeah, typically, there would be two kinds of deliveries. There's ingredients as well as can deliveries. They both typically come in a 26-foot box truck, depending on the size of your order. Never bigger than that, sometimes smaller. Everything would be on pallets, and we would probably, based on the setup of the site, have to have that delivered out front and then hand truck it through our receiving door out back.
Any other comments from public comments?
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
I have a motion to close the public hearing by Pat. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Steve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Other questions or comments from the planning commission?
I'd just like to reinforce what Steve said. I read through the packet thinking that, and it's basically one of the answers here to the exception use criteria is no outdoor activity. And I took it as that it wasn't a safe place to have any outdoor, and that's the reason why that was brought up.
Other comments or questions? I did a little bit of homework on this. From the closest point on the main building to the nearest house is 110 feet for 1983 Brewing. At the Hops, the closest house point on the building to the house is 170 feet. At the Elk, it's 195 feet. At Gray Line, it's 37 feet. So, I mean, this isn't overly out of the realm, in my opinion. Other questions or comments?
I tend to agree with you, and even you look at the type of use that it is, and it's a little bit less intensive than a lot of those places that you're naming. I feel pretty comfortable with this use in this location, and I guess I'm not sure how others feel about it, but if we're ready for it, I can make a motion.
Fire away.
All right, motion for case 19-838, 3393 Remembrance Road. I will make a motion to approve the special exception use permit submittal by Brad Lawrence, including the site plan dated 7/25/2019 for the 1983 Brewing Company LLC, use proposed at 3393 Remembrance Road Northwest. Findings of fact for special exception use permit approval or denial. The operation of the proposed small batch brewing production, sales, and service use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public because there will be very limited to no effect on neighboring properties due to the limited production on site. The use is compatible with the intent of the zoning district and will not change the essential character of the surrounding areas because the ZBA judged the use to be similar to the principal permitted uses and compatible with the intent of the C3 highway commercial zoning. The use will not result in significant adverse impact on the natural environment because the proposed process is self-contained and limited in production capacity with little byproduct produced, which will be self-contained also. The continuation of this use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property because the ZBA judged the use to be similar to the principal permitted uses and compatible with the intent of the C3 highway commercial zoning. Adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and other necessary services or facilities are provided such that the use will not place demands on public services or facilities in excess of capacity, and the continuation of the use will conform to the Walker zoning ordinance and other applicable local, state, and federal laws.
Okay, we have a motion for the special exception use permit approval. Can I get a second? Second by Joe. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Special exception use is passed. Site plan approval.
All right, for case 18-838, I make a motion to approve the site plan submittal by Brad Lawrence dated 7/25/2019 for the 1983 Brewing Company LLC use proposed at 3393 Remembrance Road Northwest. Conditions of site plan approval. The applicant agrees to all conditions stated in the city engineer's letter dated 7/29/2019, and the applicant agrees to all conditions noted, stated in the planning director's letter dated 8/7/2019.
Okay, I have a motion by Steve to approve the site plan approval. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Pat. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Incredibly helpful.
So where did 1983 come from?
Both me and my partner were born in 1980.
That's what I figured.
I graduated in 1983, so thank you. And as soon as you open, our next meeting will be there. So, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Dan, is there anything you need to say?
Okay, moving on. Case number 18-811, City of Grand Rapids Compost Yard, 2151 Butterworth Drive Southwest, site plan review. Dan? Oh, sorry.
The planning commissioners are familiar with the existing site straddling Grand Rapids and Walker there. And you know, we have a public works yard near that location, so there's a little bit of prior orientation here, so that's helpful. So just to reiterate what we just did a show of hands for, here is the subject site off of Butterworth. We're looking such that east is up on this image, and the Grand River is down here. This is feeds into it, or it's some kind of a basin, but the river's down here. The city of Grand Rapids operates their compost and public services yard. There's fire training, there's various public activities in this area, and they also have property on the Walker side. And here's our public works yard right there. So that's the backdrop for the current plan, which I'll show a little bit of orientation of the plan. And this actually isn't the proposed plan. This is some more site orientation. So let me just run through this slide really fast. And I should have put a bold line here. This is the municipal boundary. So here's where City of Grand Rapids separates from the City of Walker. They have delineated where there's some gypsum mine onto the surface of the site. There's some wetlands on the, I think, I'll let Scott speak to this. There are some wetlands on the west end of the site potentially. Our public works yard here, and then we're about a little over 1,000 feet from the Grand River to the point of the entry driveway. So when I'm looking at this plan, which I don't show a picture of the plan here, but hopefully you all got your packets in the mail, what they're proposing to do is expand their yard composting operations and to expand it, but also to better organize it with windrows and rows of, I think it's roughly 9 acres of area that's devoted to the storage and processing of this compost material from yard waste. And we're not talking about organic compost material, you know, not orange peels and old rinds and things like that. We're talking about yard waste. So I'm sure the applicant can speak better to how they process these materials. But when I'm looking at something like this is a pretty significant use, but it really falls under the category of an essential service, and I'll explain why. That's kind of one of the first foundations of a site plan like this. You want to make sure the use complies with the zoning and how we define the use. We want to talk about that. Performance standards, some of the things we talked about as staff when we reviewed this plan included how much heat, how much blown material, how much odor this stuff is producing. So we want to make sure there are appropriate limits on those nuisance items. What I call storage building impacts, there are 3 70 by 70 proposed storage buildings. And for better or for worse, they're pretty basic and functional structures. So by impacts, what I'm really referring to there is just that there's a sufficient cross-section from the roadway with some screening into this site where you have more of this kind of industrial and municipal operation. So we're not going to put the screws to the architectural code on this site, but making sure that those buildings aren't in a position where they're a big detriment to the view shed of the Butterworth Drive. On that point, we talk about the view shed and the buffering and the landscaping and screening. Finally, not that this is anything we specifically have control over, but synergy with long-term planning for Kent County Parks. This is a really important recreational corridor for Kent County Parks, stringing all the way up from John Ball Zoo in the city of Grand Rapids down to Johnson Park in the city of Walker. So at a regional scale, we want to think about how this site plugs in and doesn't impede the orderly and visually acceptable connection between all these recreational sites. So those are the key review issues. I do want to point out there were some new materials. I'm going to just jump through a few visuals here to show just summaries of some of the things I just referred to. So here's the proposed buildings, materials being stored in those buildings. Landscaping, this is just a quick sketch I did showing, rather than the kind of existing vegetation that's there now, maybe over time we start to dress up that frontage a little bit, maybe use some of the planting themes and plant materials that are used at Millennium Park with their Meadows project. Where appropriate, you can have some more things like serviceberry trees on the top of that mound rather than just the vegetation that exists now. That may be something that we incrementally work toward. I did not request that as a condition of approval, but it's something that I want to continue to work with them on. Operationally, making sure that we're comfortable with these buildings and the organization of the site overall. And talking again about the screening and landscaping, this is a new submittal from the applicant showing kind of in 3D what they think the view from Butterworth Drive into the site would look like. Thinking about long-term planning, again, this is from the Kent County Parks, Trails, and Greenways Master Plan showing the connection of various properties along that corridor over time. This site is kind of boxed out. You can see that Kent County Parks certainly doesn't plan on doing anything with this site, but adjacent, you can see a lot of existing park property and then potential future acquisitions. So it is an important parks corridor. My conditions, well, let me back up because none of these slides really get to the root of the matter here, which is that this is something that could be defined in a couple of different ways. And I'll just show this because it's the slide that shows kind of the most intensive picture of what could happen here. This is a service that's provided for residents by a municipality for what I would consider to be an essential operation, which is processing all this yard waste. It is contracted to a private business, but it's not a private business owned site. So those are important distinctions between what would otherwise be an industrial operation or something like an industrial or private recycling composting operation from what's here now, which is really an expansion of an essential service, yes, for Grand Rapids residents, but it is an essential government-provided service. And so in that regard, we have limits on what we can require. This is not something that has to be rezoned for industrial use, because again, it's not private business coming in and doing something new here. It is an expansion of a municipal service. There are also questions out there about whether this is something that can be provided to Walker residents. That's a sort of an obvious question when we're talking about property in our city. Is it something that we can benefit from if we're calling it an essential service? And I'll put 2 points forth regarding that. One is, I think there can still be a case made that if this is the optimal location regionally for this service, even if it is for residents of another city, there's a case to be made there that it is an essential service appropriate for that site. That being said, I think it's certainly a fair question to ask if Walker residents could benefit from this use. And I think the folks sitting here from the city of Grand Rapids could explain better how their model works and how the funding for this service works for city of Grand Rapids residents and how that may or may not translate for Walker. But that all being said, I think it's appropriate to allow this to move forward, just keeping in mind some conditions. I want to take the city engineer's recommendations into consideration. Also keep in mind future organic composting, so food products would trigger new requirements and a separate review from what's now called EGLE, or was formerly the DEQ. Any EGLE permits required for this project should be obtained prior to new construction. There's a comment that Scott's going to bring up about the fact that there's a sand mine operation adjacent to this site that accesses a part of this site, so we really need to make sure that that access is valid. As part of the mineral mining review, it's not really incumbent on these folks to get this figured out now, but as part of mineral mining review, we need to make sure this is resolved. There should be a combined fire prevention plan, which I know is being worked on. Information about the row heights for these piles, I think, was important to get on the plan. I know we just got a new submittal, but I did not write down for you folks the information that came in there. I think on the section drawing, they show the heights, and I'm hoping they can speak to that more. On that note, section drawings and details in the plan set, to the extent that any questions we have here about how this is, how this relates in 3D, we should get that information for our files. And any new paved surface should be dustless and non-erodible. Finally, there should be 4 final sealed plans provided to the CDD as part of the final record keeping. And that's all I have, thanks.
Okay, any questions for Dan? Scott?
You know, Dan kind of covered pretty much everything I have here, so let me fire through it super quick. We just want to make sure that anytime a plan is submitted for public review, it's got the design engineer seal on it, and then more importantly, revision dates. You know, we've looked at impound lots, we've looked at liquid waste materials and treatments, we've looked at a lot of different things out here over the last 10 or 15 years, not all formally here at the Planning Commission, but a lot at staff level. We just want to be able to keep track and know what the plan date is, what the revision, things like that. Stormwater is not likely to be too much of an issue on this site. You know, we have to take care of it. We have to make sure that the water can get underneath Butterworth. We don't want to wash that out when we get a small storm. We got to make sure it can handle a 100-year flow under there. But generally, when you're along the Grand River, we do not require stormwater detention if there's enough pipes downstream, enough capacity to get all the way to the river. The idea there is get that out ahead of the surge from upstream. And hopefully that would be the case here, but they'll have to run through those calculations to prove that. And then a few other minor things like the first flush and some of the things that you hear about all the time with various site plans. Dan mentioned the Meekoff pit. I think the question there is there an easement? It does not sound like there's an easement for them to access their pit through this site. And if that's the case, with all the security type things that we would have going on out here, we prefer that either the easement be applied or that the access be denied, one or the other, but not allow them and various contractor drivers to be in and out of there kind of unsupervised without really knowing who's there. Dan also mentioned the dustless, durable, non-erodible material. Pretty much every time you see a site with gravel, you get a comment from me about that because we don't want that stuff washing into the water bodies and downstream. Obviously, it's against our zoning ordinance. Any expansion of this site, if they come back and add some different uses, want to expand this use, Anything further west, then we're gonna have to start looking at wetland determination, because there is a ravine over there, shallow ravine, but it certainly has some wetland materials there. And then lastly, with composting material, there's always the danger for the stuff to create heat as it composts. If we've got a 40-foot pile of wood chips, that's much more of a concern than if we have windrows here that are being turned over all the time. So it's not as big of a deal, but nevertheless, our fire department was pretty adamant that they get at least the ability to get in here if there's trouble, and it should have that. So there should be some kind of a Knox box, which is like a fire department key, or something like that out front. So we want to make that a condition of any approval, and it's listed in my memo, so if you adopt my memo, you'll have that. That's it.
Any questions for Scott?
I probably live closer to this than anybody else. You live closer? Where do you live? Okay. I think on this picture, this is the bike trail, isn't it, parallel to Butterworth?
I think the bike trail hugs a little closer to the river, but it is parallel
Okay.
to Butterworth. It's a little
Okay.
farther off
You can
screen
see it
there.
on the right-hand side of the road there.
Is that it? Okay.
I thought it was. I went out there today, and I thought they're going to dump all this garbage in my backyard, and I thought it was pretty well organized. It's mostly yard waste, and we've had a huge number of storms. We've had ice storms. We've had the dead ash, and they're all out there. We got trees this big around. We got brush. There's a guy that has security. There's a little booth there, and he was checking. He was in charge of what was going on, and I think he was hired by a private agency, but he seemed to be right on top of things. There's about 5 different gates there, all of which were closed but the one, so it looks like it's pretty well controlled. I was surprised that there wasn't any junk along the road where people might have come on Sunday and just dumped it there. There wasn't any of that. You talk about windrows, yeah, I mean, they were high, and the guy there said they come by with a grinder and grind up these huge trees. And overall, I thought this was something worth pursuing. My general feeling, I went there being very pessimistic, and 51 acres, is that someplace, did I hear that someplace?
Yeah, I think that's the size of this site. So that's a little misleading on my part, because I think their site in Grand Rapids is actually smaller. But this property on the Walker side is something like 51 acres, but their footprint for this use is closer to 9 or 10, I think. So.
But what a way to get rid of this stuff. I mean, everybody's got brush and trash, and they shove it in somebody else's backfield or along the road, and I think we ought to get a piece of this, though. I think we ought to get, our people ought to be able to do this too, you know. So that's my comment. I was impressed. And you go in there, and all the roads connect, so you don't have to worry about getting out where you can't back out. And the roads, it's dry, it's mostly gravel roads, and it just goes on and on. It's amazing how, I used to ride down there with horses, and I didn't remember it being that big. It's a big place. I'm sorry, I talked too much, I'm sorry.
If the applicant wants to approach and state your name for the record.
Good evening, commissioners and city staff. My name is James Hurt. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Grand Rapids. I'm joined by design professionals from Progressive A&E, Mike Ozer and Dan Westenberg. As we said, we're here to talk about our proposed composting facility on property owned by the City of Grand Rapids on Butterworth. A portion of that lies within the City of Walker. By way of some background, Dan, any chance you could pull that site plan up? Okay, thank you. By way of some background, the City of Grand Rapids purchased this property in 1992 from a company called Domtar. If you've lived out there for some time, you probably remember Domtar. Gypsum board company that operated a mining operation here. Grand Rapids purchased it for use by several city departmental operations with the main purpose of utilizing as a composting site at some point in the future. The site is actually 76 acres, 51, Dan confirmed, I think is on the City of Walker side. It currently is a home for yard waste collection and storage, which the commissioner saw, disposal of utility dig-up material, tree removal, wood chips, a tree grove, and a training facility. The current resident drop-off location became operational in about 2011. We moved it from one area to more towards the east. The yard waste material has been coming in there since about sometime in the early 2000s. The site really is a wonderful asset for our community. Over the past few years, and you saw that today, a resident drop-off site has been seeing about a 40% increase in yard waste material coming in there. The site currently is not considered a compost site, but rather a transfer station pursuant to the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, EGLE, which was formerly DEQ. Grand Rapids historically contracted the grinding and hauling of yard waste material, brush, grass clippings, leaves, logs with a private contractor. This material was transported to a registered compost facility. But given the amount of material we're receiving at this site, coupled by the city's sustainability goals, transitioning from a transfer station to a registered compost facility is fiscally and environmentally responsible. We worked through some preliminary designs with EGLE representatives prior to our submitting a registration application for the compost facility. This discussion, much like we had with the City of Walker, centered on the site registration requirements and how stormwater would be managed on site. In terms of the facility, the proposed site plan before you, we met with the City of Walker folks a few weeks ago. And as Scott indicated, we met last year to talk about a few other things. It seems like every other year we're talking about things and what we're going to do with this site. But the primary purpose of buying the site was really about compost. The uses outlined by the planning director is identified as an essential service within the AA Agricultural Zone District. Grand Rapids has about 200,000 people within a 45 square mile area, and yard waste services are important and desired by our residents. These services have actually been provided to our residents for over 120 years. I have pictures of the day of horse and buggy pulling leaves away from residents. It was amazing. The property has been identified for composting since 1992, as I mentioned, due to its proximity away from residents in both Grand Rapids and Walker. It had mining operations all around it, and as you know, there's heavy truck traffic on this road. It provides sufficient space for all the necessary operational aspects that we're trying to achieve. Although it's closer to our west side residents, the majority of Grand Rapids residents can get to this location within about 20 minutes. Additionally, this location has the potential to serve as a regional facility due to the fact there are very few composting facilities in West Michigan. I don't know how much you know about composting, but there is only one or two that I'm aware of. A question has come up, Director Power spoke to it, whether City of Walker residents would have access to this site. Currently, the City of Grand Rapids levies a special revenue millage that covers the cost of this operation. So we tax our citizens to help cover the cost of this operation. As mentioned, the site could serve as a regional location, and we're open to discussing that with Walker with regard to shared usage and an appropriate fee structure to accommodate how do we cover this usage with the City of Walker residents. The composting method will be done by grinding yard waste, brush, logs, grass clippings, and placing them into windrows. These windrows are depicted on sheet 6. I think that might be 6 that you're looking at. These rows will be approximately 15 feet wide by 7 feet tall. You see the narrow boxes on that sheet? There are several locations that we're looking to put these windrows. A base of asphalt millings will be spread to create the windrow pad. This is dustless, durable, and non-erodible. A windrow turner machine will be used to turn the rows once or twice a week, placing the material in a consistent size during the actual composting process. The entire process will take about 12 weeks. Finished material will be marketed and sold by the compost operator. Additionally, Grand Rapids intends to use the material in construction projects replacing topsoil. This would include our street projects, our parks, our forestry operations, cemetery operations for restoration work. And we're intending to afford some material for our residents at no charge to use in their flower boxes and gardens. 3 storage buildings are proposed within the City of Walker, the 70 by 70. These would be a clear span type of building. If you're familiar with those are basically a fabric type of facility that doesn't penetrate the ground. We've got some soil condition out there with regards to the mines that we need to be cognizant of, and we think this is the best option as far as being able to have some storage. These would house snowplows, public works equipment, special events, bleachers. We have a showmobiles. We also have other materials like water mains and fire hydrants that we would also be storing inside these buildings. A truck scale and an office and storage building will be located on the Grand Rapids side near the entrance. I guess my pointer, you're not going to see my pointer, are you? Can you see it on the map, on the site plan or not? When we met with the City of Walker officials, we spent quite a bit of time talking about stormwater. Since both cities have MS4 permits and monitor this function in our respective communities, this would be a joint permitting process. So it would be, because if you look across the road, it actually goes into the city of Grand Rapids, and once it goes across the road, it just leaves coming from the City of Walker. Our intention, as I mentioned, is to capture the stormwater near the windrows in a type of grassy ditch, funnel it to where the stormwater currently meanders its way and discharges off-site. The intention is to slow the water down as much as possible and infiltrate the greatest amount. All permits will be obtained through Eagle. It is the goal of Grand Rapids to offer organics collection. You talked about food waste. We are considering that. It's been one of our goals, is having curbside organics collection in the future. And any additional requirements and permits would be obtained from Eagle. In speaking with both Walker and Grand Rapids fire departments, as well as Eagle, we will be developing a fire prevention plan for the site. This would include responsibilities that city engineer talked about, response, a knock box for the entrance, access for fire apparatus around the site. We want to make sure that both fire departments understand how to get in and out of that site in case, that, God forbid, something does happen out there. The site is currently bermed with some screening. If you've driven down it, you can't see into the site a whole lot, but it could certainly look a lot better as far as how we dress up that screening. We intend to work with your planning director on a design to enhance the view shed along Butterworth, and this would include collaborating with Kent County Parks on the screening and berming, as well as any type of signage that we would put in. The topic of reconstructing or rehabbing Butterworth has been raised. This project does not include any work within the street right-of-way. Butterworth is not identified in our 5-year capital plan for any improvements. I realize the street is not in the best condition. I drive it. It's deplorable in some respects. We've done some minor work to try to improve the drainage as well as the surface condition the past few years, but again, this project does not include any work on the street. The City of Grand Rapids is very excited about this project and is committed to collaborating with Walker. Our desire is to build a state-of-the-art facility using best management practices. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Or my technical team, because I'm not the technical expert.
Thank you for that very thorough review. Questions or comments?
I have a couple questions.
Go.
So my first question was going to be basically your last statement there. I live right along here and I drive this probably at a minimum 2 times a day, including the weekends. So I'm very familiar with this area. And I was going to ask if there's going to be anything done with the road there, but didn't sound like it at all. It's pretty rough.
I know.
Not even pretty, it's really bad.
I drive it too.
But my other question was, we didn't see any details in terms of what the structure was, and you had mentioned it was a 70 by 70 structure.
Yeah, that was an example in one of the slides.
Fabric type.
Yeah. Are you familiar with clear span buildings?
Do you have a height on those or
Well,
potential color?
I think the maximum height that I was informed was 35 feet was the highest we could go. Is that right, Dan? That's not, we haven't settled on what exactly it looked like. We wanted to provide you at least an example of what we were thinking.
Okay, so you really don't have a color yet on it either then?
No. Do you have a preference? Is it green or is it blue?
No, the only reason I was making the comment is we're approving buildings that we don't have any sizes or we're being asked to approve buildings that we have no sizes or color or any architectural features, which is a little unusual. But this site is very well what I would call blocked or
Camouflaged.
yeah, camouflage from the road. So, and like Joe said, I've been in here many times. I have family members that use this that live in the city, and I've helped them. And it's very easy in and out, and you know the function is good.
Does the zoning ordinance require a particular color?
So there's no,
No.
essential service category, and a little bit of background too that I think I missed. Essential services are permitted in every zoning district, but when they're in a residential zoning district like the AA one that this is on, we facilitate a site plan review, and that's where the planning commission steps in. There are no specific standards for architecture, but it certainly mentions in our zoning ordinance that for these essential service site plan reviews, you can scrutinize, ask for details, ask for preferences regarding architecture to protect the character of the area. So I think that's where, if you feel comfortable that there's enough buffering and screening that nobody's going to see it, that's one thing. But if it was something that was visually obtrusive to the neighbors, you'd want to have some carefully selected materials on there.
So James mentioned snow undermining. I think the difficulty is putting a structure out there because it's going to move around a little bit. And I think what these structures will do is they'll move around a little bit safely. So if you get some minor settlement, it's not going to destroy it. But if you put a concrete block building or something out there and half the building settles 3 inches, there goes the building, right? So there's limited opportunities to really do a lot with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a good fit too, and I've seen many of these buildings. I only wanted, in the event that we see a motion for approval, that we should have some sort of parameters on what it's being proposed as, not just hey, somebody's going to put a building up there and we're okay with it.
Other questions or comments for the applicant?
Yeah, I'll throw a quick comment in there. So I'm the representative of the city commission on this board, and to the point of expanding the service more regionally and potentially allowing access for city of Walker residents, I think that's probably more of a city commission discussion than it is a planning commission discussion. But I think Commissioner Glanville brought it up as a very good point, and I think that's something we certainly would have an interest in pursuing and talking about what an agreement to access that service could look like, especially with it being right in our backyard, or well, technically within the city. So that may be something that we want to follow up with you on.
Very good.
That was my one comment is that is higher up than what happens here. That's a tax issue and stuff, so.
But
Other questions or comments?
They used to, I don't know if they still do, but you could pay for it. So if you were a Walker resident, you could pay by your carload or trip. I don't know if you still can or not.
We don't permit that anymore.
Okay.
But I will tell you that there's probably a few city of Walker residents who've made their way in there.
Bad city of Walker people,
No,
bad.
I didn't say that.
No, I'm kidding. Any other questions or comments for the applicant? And Dan, this is not a public hearing?
That's right, but you can take comments.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I should just reiterate, there is a comment from Commissioner Glanville. Yellow highlights this time for your updated motion and comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody want to comment on this case? Seeing that there is none, we'll move on. And what's the pleasure of the planning commission? Any other comments, or I'll entertain a motion to table, deny, or approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. Motion case number 18-811, motion for Grand Rapids Oh, you got one of these here, okay. I make a motion to approve the site plan for the proposed compost facility specifically as proposed at 2151 Butterworth Drive Southwest in the city of Walker, subject to the following conditions and based on findings of fact noted below. The applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 8/6/2019, which is the one you just put on our table here. Dan?
Yep.
And then the applicant agrees to the conditions noted in the city engineer's letter dated 7/30/2019. Findings of fact are, the proposed use is reasonably necessary for the furnishings of adequate service by the City of Grand Rapids Department of Public Works and for the general public health, safety, and welfare for the residents of the City of Grand Rapids and the City of Walker because the subject site is essential for the sound and feasible operation of the essential service being provided because the services currently provided are being expanded to meet the need for the community. And composting is an environmentally friendly way to service yard waste in a location that's conducive for this service. The proposed expanded yard waste composting operation does provide a regional benefit by offering an optimal location for the drop-off of leaves, brush, and tree branches in close proximity to the residents of the City of Grand Rapids. And the proposed use has synergy with the adjacent City of Walker Public Works Department-oriented site located at 2251 Butterworth Drive Southwest. Conditions regarding architectural, landscape, setback, enclosures, and other conditions as are appropriate to protect the adjacent future parks and recreation corridor in nearby residential lands have been imposed.
Did you want to add anything about the building approval?
We didn't really specify anything other than
So I
35
would
feet.
support, as long as we had something in there that would say that it's a fabric type structure, maximum height of 35 feet, which meets our ordinance. I'd like to put the 70 by 70, but I don't want to pigeonhole them into it, because if all of a sudden they get a 70 by 80 and it's a much better deal, I have no problem with that. But I don't want to see a blank, we're being asked to approve a building, not a site. And I don't want to just see a blank, nothing there. Does that make sense?
So I turn it into Silver Dome.
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean,
say-
it's
I
just
would-
not, that's just not a good thing for us to do, because somebody else could come in and have a similar kind of request, and
By city.
we would say, okay, what size building is it?
Okay. Conditions are 35 feet max height, and then structure to be approved by city staff.
Is that good?
It's whatever,
About as restrictive as you can get without a plan.
that's the thing. How much more restrictive should we be getting?
If staff looks at it, I don't have a problem with it, but, because I trust Dan anyway, but.
Well, the plan says 70 by 70, or at least scales to 70 by 70, correct?
70/70, and it's
Restructured.
something like that type of structure.
Quonset hut.
Yeah, like I said, I have no problems with it at all.
So if
I
they did
just,
something dramatically different, they would be stopped and told that that's not part of the approval.
yeah, I'm fine with that. I just don't want to get stuck into something where we didn't do a little bit of due diligence on it.
Sir?
Yeah, Commissioner, it's my understanding under the building code, 5,000 square feet and above has to have a suppression system.
Oh.
So we don't have any water out there, so we want to stay underneath the 5,000 square feet. 70 by 70 is 4,900.
4,900. Yeah,
Well, we're underneath it,
So we're not going any bigger.
you better not go any bigger.
so we're not going to be going 70 by 80. 70 by 70 would be the maximum we go. Could be, 60 by 75 or something like that, but it's not going to go any higher than 5,000 square feet.
Should we just say a 5,000 square foot facility? Yeah,
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
that,
I'm fine with that.
I just don't want to, you guys see where I'm going with this. I
You
don't
don't
want
wanna
to
leave it open-ended.
I don't have an open-ended deal here, because I just don't want somebody else coming in and going, give me a.
Maximum height 5,000 square feet, or.
Maximum height 35 feet, square footage 5,000 square feet or less, and approved by city staff.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Pat, support by Jason. Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Case number 17-763, Bald Eagle Ridge Site Condominium, 3536 Lake Michigan Drive, Site Plan Extension Request. I'll cut to the chase. Applicant Jeff Allen and Mike Gantos have applied on behalf of Bald Eagle Ridge LLC for a one-year extension to the effect of this final site condominium plan, site plan approval. Right, Dan?
I make a motion to approve.
Daniels is here. The motion for this is set up like we've had similar site plans in the past. This was a site condominium that was reviewed a few different times in 2017. Final approval from for the preliminary site condominium came from you folks. That's where the meat and potatoes of review came in. That was finally done in January of 18. Final layout plans were submitted to City Commission and approved in July of 18. So we said, per what we do for site plan reviews, your site plan's only good for a year. So you have to come in and get an extension. So the findings of fact have to be based on a strong case from the applicant that there have been, there's reasonable evidence that delay in commencing construction was due to unforeseen difficulties beyond the control of the applicant. So that's what we're asking Mr. Gantos to back up, and he provided a pretty thorough letter there on page 5 of this packet. So him and Mr. Ellen. So it's not a public hearing, it's a simple motion. You can invite him up to comment if you'd like.
Any questions or comments? Otherwise, do you really want to add something? I don't think there's much of an issue here, so. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve an extension for up to 1 year for conditionally approved final site condominium plan for 18 site condominium units at 3536 Lake Michigan Drive Northwest. Findings of fact for section 94-286C of the Walker zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission finds that the applicant has provided reasonable evidence that the delay in commencing construction was due to unforeseen difficulties beyond the control of the applicant, including the following difficulties. I read that it was the lender backing out that was the biggest, and so conditions of approval, I have none. So.
Okay, we have a motion by Mark. Is there support?
Support.
Who said that? Motion by, support by Steve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Sorry you had to sit through that. Okay, Dan, discussion item, rezoning 2482 Wilson Avenue Northwest.
Okay.
Oh, that's that little site right out here.
Yep, right out.
We should all go out there right now.
I would recommend driving by and trying to take pictures of it like I did. That's not safe driving practice. Trying to get the number on that sign is not the easiest thing to do. But yeah, just really quickly, I want to touch on this because we've gotten calls over the years, a few calls here and there, and I understand Frank watched it long before I was ever here too. So people have been speculating on this property for a long time. It has been zoned C1, local commercial, for a long time as well, probably a remnant from the original configuration of Wilson or Remembrance before it was a roundabout. 3+ years ago, it was more of a regular configuration, and it made more sense the way land use is lined up along Wilson with the bar right across the street. But the fact is that this has been master planned for something that's not consistent with that zoning for a long time. And we get a little bit concerned with the spatial feasibility of having a site be potentially proposed for a commercial development site on that lot. So this is not something we do very often. In fact, I don't think I've done it with the Planning Commission since I've been with Walker, but we just want to broach the topic of proactively zoning this site to be more aligned with the master plan. And I did contact the owner about this, and we'll walk through this process with them, and of course involve them in the public hearing if it comes to that. But I just want to plant the seed today to talk about this. What it is planned for is medium density residential. functionally, what appears to make the most sense here may be that it becomes part of the condominium, Falcon Point condominium site to the north in some fashion. Maybe they can get some units back there, or maybe it's something that would have to be creatively done to get access to that part of the site. But the fact of the matter is, getting access to that site as a commercial site would invite more challenges than are probably worth it, considering wetlands and proximity to that roundabout. So I'm just introducing it today. Our community development director, the mayor, wanted to kick off this process. So don't have to make a motion or do anything special about it, but if you have any comments about it, feel free to share them. Otherwise, just know that we'll bring this back in the future.
What's that worth?
I don't know exactly. I didn't get a recent price, but I think that there's a question to be had with perhaps the city commission as to whether there's a price that's worth it for the city, but I don't think it's a high priority site for the city. I think that's been talked about before as well.
What is, have you talked to the landowner?
I've talked to the broker.
Okay, because he's out of East Lansing. The
Berkshire
landowner
Hathaway is who I've
is the broker.
been in touch with.
Yeah. I mean,
He's in Omaha, isn't he?
the address I got for,
Berkshire Hathaway?
oh no, Gregory Arnton, Gregory Lee Arnton is the actual owner.
Yeah, I saw that in the assessing records. I did not get a contact for.
He's out of East Lansing, but what do you want to do with a 1.5 acre commercial lot that's next to a roundabout? I mean, holy smokes.
Gas station.
A gas station. I know, a tattoo parlor.
Marijuana.
Oh, this is going downhill fast.
Yeah.
I was gonna say a strip club, but that would just be way out.
Well, the master plan is gonna give us a good chance to mash the zoning map we have now on top of the future land use map we have now and kind of reassess where there are some of those disparities.
You want,
We got lucky with, there's one example where this has worked out really well, where we had a site that was zoned not in accordance with the master plan. Somebody came in and developed it, and it seems to be working pretty well, which is the 2648 3-mile industrial site. At least it's designed well. We have had, obviously, the paintball proposal fell through there, but that's an industrially zoned site right next to residential, which is not how it was planned, but it is how the zoning was when they applied, and they designed it to be really suitable for that site. And there are sites like that in Walker that are zoned not the way they're.
that was a special site. It had huge buffering because of the wetlands and stuff, just enormous buffering. Personally, my opinion, if you just want it, is I'd rather see this medium density than commercial. I can't imagine putting something in there. But do you have to have the landowner's permission to do that?
You don't. We, a big example is Standale Downtown District was probably the most recent, well, actually the Trick Pit where they built the storage unit site. Again, for that one, we had the owner sign off on the application, but really it was a city-initiated rezoning. Same with many of the properties in Standale got rezoned by the city to SDD Downtown District. Federal law over the years has said that zoning is a legislative action and is not a taking. It's not a taking of land. It's a proactive effort by communities to reasonably shape their future land use. So more or less, that's my take on it. But it is legal for cities to rezone property.
it?
That's a whole other question.
That is a whole other question.
That was a can of worms I just opened.
I wouldn't mind buying.
Put a park
I think
there.
that we love our police and fire memorial there, and any if the right opportunity struck and it came to us, I think we would consider it. But if
1.57.
That's it.
yeah, well, you're slapping it onto our existing, like it's almost an expansion of the city campus then, though.
Yeah, it would be.
But for my part, I think that Tyler's right, medium density residential, we got it master planned that way, so I think that's the only type of rezoning that makes sense for us to have initiated it and pursue. I think if we're gonna pursue something else, it needs to be a different process with the landowner.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. Tons of ideas here. Good. Okay, that's all I got for tonight. Any other questions about that site? All right.
Walker's compost site.
Yeah, a little, be a little incubator for our own compost operation.
Okay, any other updates or anything, Dan?
Big meeting on the 21st. You just got the invite for the Standale Open House, so I think our master plan process is doing as good as it can to keep things moving quickly, but also get good public input. I think we've gotten some good feedback on the structure of those open houses so far. You guys show up whenever you feel comfortable for the open house. It's a long night if you're here for that, plus the regular meeting, because there will be a regular meeting at 7. So if you can make part of the open house for Standale, great. I'm pretty sure that's going to be well attended. I'm pretty sure we already have a Facebook feed of comments about it from being posted for a day, which is good. But then after that open house, we're going to, there will be one site plan review for DTE. DTE's buying some property on 3 Mile where the old childcare was that was owned by Kenowa Hills right across from Central Elementary. So they're putting a small campus there. So that's our site plan review item that night. Otherwise, we're just going to be recapping master plan stuff. So going back, recapping the 5 o'clock open house, and some progress checks on the Alpine and South Walker planning efforts.
For the Alpine one, we're gonna see a draft there, right?
There will be a draft. I don't want to speak for Chris on what's going to be posted, but I'm sure we can share materials with you guys if they're not actually going through the draft that night. I think they're going to start to get pretty close on their recommendations, and I think the idea is to put the highlights up and recommend, they're going to ask you for a blessing on the future land use and the mobility plan, that type of stuff that night.
This is the fire station.
Yes, Fire Station 2 on the 21st, that's right. Yeah.
Open meetings.
Yep, that's right. Then we'll go back here on September 4th. September 4th, a couple of site plan reviews. We got Blaine's Farm and Fleet. I don't know if you've heard about Blaine's Farm and Fleet. That's a farm and fleet store that's proposed to the south side of the Standale Crossings Mire. There's been an outlot plan there for many years, and
Is that by the credit union then?
yeah, behind the credit union, south of the Mire. And then there's, yeah. Yep.
There's one up by 7 Mile now on Alpine.
That's Coopersville. There's a different.
It's a farm and fleet or a farm and garden or something.
Yeah.
One of those stores, but geez, that seems close.
Yeah. Well, they just built 3 or 4 of these Blaine's Farm and Fleet. They're out of Wisconsin, but they built one in Traverse City, one in Jackson, one in South Haven, I think, or they're building them right now. So
I feel like every few years I hear of like a brand new chain of these like farm supply stores. It's
How many
crazy.
can you have?
Yeah, like Family Farm at Home was like what, 10 years ago, something like that they started popping up around the area. Crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's a site that's pre-planned, so it's a pretty big use, but that site's been planned that way for a while, but we will try to leverage that in our recommendations, talking about the overall transportation planning in that area.
You said south of Mire?
South of Mire, yep.
So it exits onto, enters and exits onto Lake Michigan Drive?
It'll be part of that overall grid. It's gonna come out onto Wilson.
Credit union.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything on
So-
anything on the other side of Mire?
Nothing formal. We hear little ideas here and there, but nothing formal yet. So, not little ideas, but undeveloped ideas. All right,
Any Chick-fil-A's yet?
stay tuned.
People want one, right there in Wilson, like.
Everybody wants one.
Because I tell them, no, we turn one down on it.
We already turned down one after? Oh, I've gotten yelled at for that. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about that.
Stay tuned.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.